trends in social engineering. As Jeff said, my name is Patrick Laverty, and I have some experience with this, including a certification as a certified ethical social engineer. If you want to ever contact me later on, you can also do that at the email address that you see there, and we can kind of continue with these slides. So, like we said before, we want this to be interactive. We can see your questions. Feel free to ask questions. And also, if something comes up where you have your own stories or examples, anything like that, put those in the chat as well. It's always fun to hear other people's stories, even to the point where I used to love listening to people's social engineering stories. It always seemed like somebody had a fun one to tell about, even if it was a little bit. And that actually started with a different company that I worked at. And one thing that we would periodically do was what we just called like a hackathon, where people would stand up in front of the entire team and show some fun new project, some new project, tool, anything like that they were working on. But it seemed like every time somebody stood up and talked about a social engineering engagement that they did, that was always one of the most fun things to listen to the point where I actually even started a podcast about it. So I have a Layer 8 podcast that talks all about social engineering, OSINT, and anything like that. So if you enjoy those types of stories, you might like that one too. As we go through this, we'll talk about all the different types of social engineering. We'll see what they are. If you got questions about any of those specific types, feel free to ask those, because I think I've done them all in one way or another, some far more than others. And for this presentation, I also borrowed heavily from a couple other reports. So if you see some data, you see some graphs, I just want to make sure that everybody knows up front that the phishing data does come from the 2024 Verizon DBIR, which was recently released. And the vishing, or the voice phishing data, comes from the 2024 Social Engineer State of Phishing report. I didn't bother putting the credit on each slide that uses those, just so it didn't get too cluttered, but I wanted to make sure that that was put out there up front so everybody was aware and that I wasn't trying to steal anybody else's information or anything like that. So that's where the data comes from. And if you want to see more about the data, it's all going to be in there as well. All right, so first, well, people generally have an idea about what is social engineering, but we like to throw a definition out there at the beginning. And I like to use this definition. It's an act that causes someone to take an action that may or may not be in their best interest. Social engineering happens all over the place. And one of the things that I always love to ask people is, who are the best social engineers? And it's probably not something that comes to mind. If you start, I'm just going to give you a second to think of who might be the best social engineers anywhere in the world, the people that can get someone to take an action that may or may not be in their best interest. I like to say your kids. If you have kids, they're the best social engineers. And if you even reverse it to where once you were a kid, think about all the ways you were able to get your parents to do something. Like, how often does that cute little kid go up to their parent and say, "Can I have ice cream?" It's like, no, that's not a good idea. And then they just give you like those puppy dog eyes to the point like, okay, fine, go get the ice cream. They figured out how to do it just by using what they know is going to work, using their skills, using what we like to see as their principles of influence or their persuasion. There's social engineering everywhere. We see it all the time, whether outside of the IT field, we see a lot of the same skills in sales. Where you go into a car dealership, one of the things that I've noticed right off the bat is they're going to be super friendly. They're going to find something that they have in common with you. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of these principles as well. I think one time I walked into a car dealership with a hat on with a specific sports team, and somebody was like, "Oh, you're a fan of that team? So am I." Makes that person likable, makes me want to like them. And then they say, "Can I get you a cup of coffee? Can I get you something to drink?" They're trying to do some gift giving. So all across different fields, social engineering exists. And I'm guessing most people that are here are looking to, are from the IT field and looking to really focus on that part of it as well. And let's see, let's move this off to the side. It's just checking for any of the questions.
Hey, Patrick, your slides didn't advance.
Really?
Yep, we're stuck on the title screen.
Huh. But my screen is still sharing, huh?
Yes.
I wonder, what if I minimize this over here? Okay, let's try stop share. Share screen. Is it changing?
Nope.
Why is it not? Participants can now start application.
Up, there we go.
Okay, and it's probably going to kick me out again. Zoom quit unexpectedly again. Don't send.
Zoom is not playing nice today.
It is not. Not in the least. Sorry, everybody. And what do we have now, Jeff?
We have let's be interactive.
Perfect. Okay, so that was the first slide that I was talking through that people didn't see. What if I just don't do anything? Is the Zoom quit unexpectedly popping up?
Nope.
Okay, well, we'll see. And do we have the what is showing?
We do.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll keep going with this and hopefully Zoom doesn't kick me out. All right, so then the next question about what is social engineering, a lot of people like to think that manipulation and social engineering are the same thing. And I often tell people yes and no, in that manipulation is social engineering, but social engineering is not manipulation. And the way that I like to look at that is you always have umbrella terms. Like, for example, human is an umbrella term. And then underneath that, you have adults, children. They're both humans, but not all of them are the same type. It's going to be the same thing here. Manipulation is one part of social engineering, but not all social engineering is going to be manipulation. That's one of those just little things that I like to kind of throw out there to kind of get people to understand some of the differences with those as well. That really with social engineering, we saw that definition before to get somebody to take an act that may or may not be in their best interest. And really, when we are doing ethical social engineering, which most of the people here that probably do these types of things, as far as whether they are doing testing, sending out phishes, doing phone calls, anything like that, they want to do this ethically. And when we do it ethically, the way that it's going to come out is that people are not going to feel terrible about it. We're not trying to make people feel terrible about this. And really, when we are manipulating people, the whole goal there is to make sure that we get what we want. When we're doing our social engineering, we want to make sure that everybody gets what they want. It feels like a good deal for both sides. We can easily use manipulation in social engineering, but it's not going to be very good long term, and people are not going to feel really too great about it. So that's one little piece that I like to throw out there as well. So we'll look at some of the different types of social engineering here as well. A lot of these you've probably heard of. We get the phishing, which is the emails. We get the vishing, phone calls, smishing, which is SMS or text phishing. Quishing is kind of a new-ish one for QR codes. If you've ever seen the QR codes and wondered about the security of those, always interesting to think, what if we were able to replace that QR code with your own QR code, especially when you check in at an airport now. Lots of times you see the QR codes there for various things, and whether you trust those is going to be up to you. And then there's a term that I created myself, impersonation, which is usually just impersonation. A lot of times that goes with getting physical access into a facility, being able to just walk into a building, impersonating as someone else, whether you're going to be impersonating an employee or whether you're impersonating the phone company or the exterminators or anything like that, in order to be able to impersonate your way into the facility. One thing that we also often see, especially in reports like the DBIR, they refer to pretexting as a type of social engineering. And when you kind of look at it a little bit further, it seems as though pretexting is more just a subset of the ones above. Like in the Verizon DBIR, they sort of refer to that in the context of a business email compromise, where inside of the business email compromises, what will often happen is the attackers will get access into somebody's email and they'll look through the email threads and the chains and just jump right into those and become that person who has already had that email conversation with other people. Now, if you're having an email conversation with somebody, especially if it's your manager, your supervisor, or anything like that, and as part of that chain and in the same context, using the same type of language, someone else jumps in and sends a follow-up to that, you're probably going to do what they are asking you to do. So in that way, the business email compromises are usually pretty tough to defend against once those are sent, and really tough to blame somebody for doing anything wrong with those. I look at pretexting as a part of all of these, where for me, a pretext is the reason that you're there, the explanation that you're giving to somebody. Everybody here who's listening has probably at one time or another received a scam email or a text message. You've all received these terrible phishing emails that you see in there, and there's always a reason that they're sending the email. Whether it is a long lost cousin who has all kinds of gold and wants, that's their pretext, that's their reason for being there. Sometimes even on the phone, people, you've probably heard about some of these different attacks where it's the grandson who got arrested and now needs money to get out of jail. That's their pretext, that's their reason for calling. So I just put that asterisk there because if you read some of these other sources, you're going to see pretexting listed as one of these types, in the same with phishing, vishing, smishing, all these others. I just have sometimes a hard time really separating that as a specific type of social engineering, where I see the pretext as being built right in there with all of it. Now, as Jeff said earlier, there's also the emerging trends. And I'm guessing there's one emerging trend that a lot of people want to hear about, and that's going to be for the AI part, this artificial intelligence. How does AI fit in with social engineering? And my honest answer for you is it's too early to know. We're seeing lots of different things coming up with AI and social engineering in a way that, in some ways that it's too early. I'm guessing many of you have heard about the voice cloning attacks, where you can make your voice sound like anybody else, and you can also make video look like someone else. So if I were to use one of those tools and make my face look like my company's CEO and make my voice sound just like my company's CEO, and I start up a Zoom chat or Teams chat or whatever other one with somebody at work, and I ask them to go take some kind of action, to go get money somewhere, to go buy something, they're probably going to do it. It's really tough to defend against those types of things. So two things with that. I said that it's pretty new and we haven't really completely figured it out yet. However, as I was doing some research for this, I saw that one of those types of attacks happened in 2019, where there was a company that was compromised because of somebody that did the voice cloning, that did the video cloning as far back as 2019. I didn't know that we had the technology 5 years ago and it was already being used in attacks. So I thought that that was pretty interesting that those things have been happening for all of that amount of time as well. I also saw that IBM did some research probably about 6 months ago or so, where they did a test of AI versus a human creating phishing messages, and wanted to see how did AI do with being able to create the phishing messages. And what it turned out was, while the results were very close, the human created phishing message got better click rates and got better action on the message than the AI. It was close, but the human created one was still better. Now, of course, over time, that's probably going to close the gap, or maybe even AI will pass how the human is capable of doing that. And they said probably the major thing that AI was able to do better than the human was the investigation, the OSINT part. Because for any of these, you're always going to want to start with doing your OSINT, or your open source intelligence gathering. Now, AI, that's exactly everything it is. That's where we go to go do our OSINT, to go get that information. It's going to be being able to search the databases, and that's what AI has already. So AI can create those messages super fast. You can just go right in and tell it to create a phishing message that is based on XYZ, and it's going to create it almost instantly. Whereas if you tell a practitioner to do that, it might take them a few hours, at least, if not days, to do the research to be able to create the message that looks that good. So that's really going to be one of the differences there. But that's about the extent of information that I have on the AI so far. I'm not using it. I like doing my own investigations. I like gathering the information myself, because when you start doing these, there's a lot of these types of social engineering engagements that you really have to think on the fly. And if you're just trusting AI to do it, you have no idea what all that information is, where it got it. There might be little nuggets that you kind of saw as you were doing the OSINT and the investigation for it that just kind of comes up at the last minute. I've had multiple times where people will ask me, who are you working with on this? What company are you? And I can just remember as I was going through, oh yeah, there was the name Bob. I can just throw that out there and be like, yeah, I'm working for Bob from the accounting department. I'm like, oh, okay. If you're working for Bob, then you're probably supposed to be here. So that kind of thing has worked for me in the past as well. All right, getting into each of these types. And again, like I mentioned at the beginning, the phishing information is coming from the Verizon DBIR. So if we see some of this data here for the phishing, starting with the 68% of breaches are involving the human element. So humans are still going to be a huge issue for us. Now, I'm also not a believer in the human is the weakest link, or humans are dumb or humans are bad or anything like that. The way that I like to really look at social engineering engagements is less that we are trying to trick people, testing people, or anything like that. I like to explain it that we are testing the policies and procedures and education levels at a company. Because anytime that I start with doing one of these types of social engineering engagements, one of the first things that I ask the person that hired me is, what is the level of training? What is the policy? What is the procedure that you have told people that they need to follow when faced with this type of engagement? And if they say, none, we want to see what our baseline is, I just explain to them, this is not going to go well for you. If they have not been trained at all, it's going to be bad. And the way that I like to kind of explain that one as well, to get that one across, is, let's say that you just decide one day that you want to try boxing. Like, I want to be a boxer. So you say, I'm going to go to a boxing gym and I'm going to go learn how to be a boxer. You step in, you explain to the instructor, this is what I want to do. I want to be a boxer. And they say, great, step in the ring. And across from the ring is Mike Tyson. How is that going to go for you? You don't even know how to hold your hands. You don't know how to put gloves on yet. You don't know where your feet go. And you're going to try to box against Mike Tyson. That's not going to be good. Really, what I like to do with these is I like to make sure that the testing that we are doing is at or even just slightly above the level of training. So when somebody tells me what their training is for their employees, that's going to be the level at which I test. So that way I'm not jumping in there at a much higher level, because it's not about me winning or me making sure that I compromise. I'm there to test the policies and procedures and education level of the people. So that way they can see where the gaps are in those three things: the policies, the procedures, and the education. They can see if the education is working, if the people are listening, who is listening. Maybe there's a specific department within the company who does much better than a different department. They can then figure out why. They can go see if they need to tailor the education better. But according to DBIR here, they're still seeing that about 2/3 of all the breaches involved some degree of the human element with that. So still a little bit concerning for us here. I thought this one was interesting as well, but also when you really start thinking about it, it kind of makes sense. So from the time that the phishing message is opened, it takes about 21 seconds until the person clicks the link. And if you're looking for credentials or some kind of other information to be entered from the time that they open that email, less than a minute, about 49 seconds. Kind of makes sense. You open an email, you see that there's going to be some kind of action that needs to be done. You're probably going to do it right away. It's not very often that you're going to open up that email and say, yeah, I'll get back to that later. So this is kind of shows that that incident response team is going to really have to be on top of things relatively quickly in order to head things off. So in other words, that's not good that things are happening that quickly. And especially for your incident responders and your defenders, they have to be ready to act quickly. But there's another part of this that we can really help those people with. There's another way that even if that link gets clicked, even if the data gets entered, credentials get sent, that we can help them with that. And that is going to be through reporting. One of the other things that I really like to emphasize through some of these presentations, if you are doing any of these types of testing, if you're doing monthly, quarterly, annual phishing testing, let's start putting less to even no emphasis on click rates. I know that that's often the thing that we really want to know is what was the click rate? How many people clicked? Okay, I can see some value in that information. We can also see what those click rates are nationally, internationally through all the data sets. But I like to tell people, I don't care about the click rates. What I care about is the reporting rates. And I often also like to tell people, I would rather have 50 people click the link and report it than to have one person click the link and not report it. And that's largely because as somebody who does this type of testing, I like to tell them I only need one set of credentials to get in through your VPN in order to get into somebody's mailbox, in order to get more information. Just one is all I need. And if they don't report it, then that blue team, that incident response team, has no idea that they're under attack. They have no idea that something bad has happened until you start digging a little bit further. Somebody logs in with those credentials, that might raise some alarms. But this is where I really like to emphasize reporting. So if you're doing these types of tests, you really want to make sure that everybody knows that reporting is good, reporting is important. We don't want to do the click shaming. If people are clicking, okay, that's not the best. But if they click it and report it, they did it right. Good job. Maybe next time you won't click and you will only report it. But for this time, you reported it. Excellent. I even had not a phishing test recently, but a couple months ago, I was tasked with getting access into a bank. So, some of those can be kind of scary where you're trying to get physical access, walk into sensitive areas of a bank, and was in there for probably about an hour, hour and a half or so, being able to do whatever I wanted all through the back office spaces, having conversations with people, interacting with them, just acting like I was supposed to be there. But finally, after about an hour and a half, one of the people that I was speaking to, something went off in her head. And she was like, you probably shouldn't be here. She started asking me for my badge, which I didn't have. So she walked me out of the building and reported me to security. So at that point, the job was pretty much up, couldn't do too much more. The person she reported me to in security was the person who had hired me to be there. So he called, he said, come on back in. And the three of us had a conversation. And she was so embarrassed because she gave me a whole bunch of information, which that was my job, was to try to get information out of her as we were having this conversation. But I tried to emphasize to her over and over again, yes, you gave me all the information, but you reported me. You shut it down. No one else did. I had interactions with lots of other people in the office. You now know what this looks like. You're going to be somebody who's going to be great at shutting this down and telling other people what it looks like within the company. So you did a great job by shutting it down and reporting. So that is where reporting is going to be good. That's where we want to emphasize this. And I have on there, even if it's obvious, how many times do you get an obvious phishing email and you're like, that's ridiculous, I'm just going to delete it? Well, it's obvious to you, but it might not be obvious to somebody else. And somebody else might click on it. Somebody else might click and send information. And again, if it's not being reported to your incident response team, they can't take action on it. So even if you think it's obvious, even if you think your cubicle mate has already reported it, report it anyway. Flood the blue team, flood the incident response people with the reports. Chances are they have something set up so that they can triage things very easily. I know during the tests that I've done, we make sure that all the reports do get funneled into a certain area so that the help desk or the incident response team doesn't get flooded with it. So we like to tell people, even if it is obvious, even if you think somebody else has already reported this, report it anyway, because one thing we would love to see on a phishing test or even an actual phishing attack to a company is a 100% reporting rate. We would love to see for everybody to report it. That would be a great day. Haven't seen that yet, but that would be great if we could ever get there. All right, so here are some more numbers, some data from that Verizon DBIR. And this is really where I like to look at these. We see on the left that this is the reporting rate, and we see the reporting rate going up, which is great in order to see the reporting rate going up over time. But when you actually look at the numbers on the left side, we're probably just approaching 20% in that red line, the top line there. 20% reporting is not really all that great, especially where I just said we're looking, see if we can get upwards of 100. The bottom line, the clicked line, we see is considerably lower. That's probably around 10%. So that means the top line is probably close to 20% that did not click, and immediately recognized it and reported it. But the bottom one is people that clicked and reported it. So there's going to be a whole lot more people that are clicking and not reporting. That's going to usually be either one, they didn't know it, or two, they're too embarrassed. Sometimes people get mad and don't want to report things, or they just get embarrassed with it. But again, clicking is okay if you report it. Clicking and not doing anything is really the worst outcome. We often say that there's going to be the four outcomes, which is to, you don't click on it and you report it. You click on it and you report it. You don't click on it and you don't report it. Is that because you didn't see it, or just because you thought it was spam and just threw it away? And then there's the worst one, that you clicked on it and didn't report it. Those are the people that you really want to go to and say, did you recognize that that was a phish? Why didn't you report it? We need that in the future. All right. We also saw that about 20% of the breaches are phished credentials. So with all of those breaches that we're seeing, the way that the attackers are then getting in is because they were just given credentials, username and password. So how do we stop that type of thing? Well, we often say that multi-factor authentication, MFA, 2FA, is going to be the way to stop these. And yes, that does make life much more difficult. When I'm doing these types of tests and I need to get access into the system, if I see that they do have multi-factor authentication, it makes my life much harder, but I'm not saying it's impossible. It is still possible to bypass those types of things. And the way that we are going to bypass them is with social engineering. So I have their story time, because I was recently doing an engagement for a client where, before it all started, the client walked me through, and I think they had like a Salesforce instance. It was a company that had, multi-million dollars of sales, had all their client information and all their sale information and all that in there. And he was telling me, if you get access into that and can show me that you have access into our sales data, our client data, that's terrible for us. So I'm like, okay, cool. That's the target that I'm really going for, that I want. So once I also figured out that this company had multi-factor authentication into place, so it's not something I'm going to be able to just brute force my way, which brute force means that I'm going to just go to like LinkedIn or something like that and get a whole list of usernames and then just guess at passwords. Sometimes that can work because people do use weak passwords. Because even if I am able to guess a username and a password, there's still going to be the multi-factor authentication problem that's in place. So what I was doing was, first, I think we sent out a phish as the IT department, telling them that we needed to do an update to the company's Salesforce. So in order to stay current, in order to still have access to Salesforce, you need to run this update. So of course you need to log in for the update and make sure that it goes all the way through. And of course, because they're all salespeople, they care about having access to their Salesforce data. And eventually I saw that I think 2 people did it and filled out the information. I had credentials. I'm like, this is great. Except then as soon as I tested it out, put in the username and the password, I get, the 2-digit Microsoft, here's your multi-factor authentication. Was a little bit blocked from there. So I said, let's pick up the phone. I could tell by the username who it was that entered their information. I called them on the phone as the name of the person that said, I need you to do this update for the Salesforce. And I told them it's most of the way through, but it didn't quite complete. One thing that you probably saw was the Microsoft login came up and the person's like, no, I don't see that. I'm like, okay, I think that's the problem. Hang on 1 second. Because I had the username and the password, I could go on the side and log in as that person, and it's going to push the multi-factor to them. And I just told them, okay, for this to finish, you're going to get the MFA to pop up. Just tell me what the number is that comes on there, and it'll complete. Well, you can pretty much guess the rest of the way. That happened. I had it all logged in. Things just asking me for the 2 digits. The person over the phone tells me the 2 digits. I type it in. I tell them, great. Now you have your access to Salesforce again. Everything's great. Don't worry. Don't think about it anymore. I don't want them thinking anymore. And your access is going to continue on. Fortunately, from that point, had full access to the company's Salesforce, screenshot that, send it over to the person that hired me and said, mission accomplished. So these things are bypassable as well. Voice phishing or vishing. One reason that I like the voice phishing different from email phishing is we can react. We're actually human to human talking to them on the phone. All too often, just in the initial greeting and how they say hello, you can get an idea in those just couple seconds how their day is going, whether that's really short or grumpy or something super friendly. That's all something that a human can react with. And if you start studying these things a little bit, where you start looking at the principles of influence with Cialdini and his 6 principles of persuasion, principle of influence, or you can look at Robin Dreek's principles of rapport. He's got 10 steps that you can also use to build rapport with other people. I think in his book, It's Not All About Me, which is a great thing to be able to use as well. And this is also where our social engineering versus manipulation is going to come into play. It's all too easy on the phone to just threaten somebody to say, I'm the CEO of this company. If you don't do what I need, if you don't give me your password right now, you're going to be fired. That's terrible. That's a really bad thing to do. Now, of course, the attackers are going to do that, but we're the good guys. We're not the attackers, and we don't want people to feel bad for this. So the manipulation part, threatening, is not something that we're going to do. Instead, we're going to try to find a different way. And one of the things that I often get told by people is, well, the bad guys are going to do it, so why don't you do it as well? And one reason that I like to explain to them is, let's say you task me with getting into the vault of a bank. Well, one way that I could certainly do that is I could go rent a backhoe and I could rip the back of the building off and tear the vault apart, and I'm in. Anybody can do that. Well, that's kind of manipulation. However, if I can come to you and say, well, I found that your security guard goes and takes a break at 10:15 every day, and they put the receptionist in place, and I was able to bring, this box of donuts to the receptionist and then ask to go use the bathroom, and the next thing you know, I'm into the vault. Now that tells you that you have a hole in there and nobody's really feeling too bad about that. So we like to kind of think our way around it and not make everybody feel bad with the manipulation part. So one thing that I was hoping that some people could do here is try to envision a scenario where you can obtain credentials, obtain somebody's password over the phone. Is that even possible? I'm guessing that some people think, yeah, that's probably possible. Would it be possible with you? Could I call you on the phone and get your username and your password to log in? Probably not. But another way to look at it is it's a numbers game. Because remember, how many sets of credentials do I need to get access? I just need one. So really, I'm going to be looking for that one person in the entire company who's willing to do it. And you can kind of see in this data here that I pulled from that social engineer state of vishing report, they in this year's report had a N or sample size of more than 16,000. So more than 16,000 vishing phone calls made up this pie graph. And we can see that 3/4 of them were shut down, that they did not get the information that they were seeking. 25.8% were compromised, meaning they did obtain the information they were looking for. You see there's another little slice in there for VM compromise, that's voicemail. Sometimes companies don't want bits of information released to the public for whatever reason, and sometimes people leave that on their voicemail, so they consider that a compromise as well. But really what I'm focused on here is that 25.8% of 16,000, that's about 4,000 people that they were able to make phone calls to and get information about. So the first time that that ever worked for me, so like I said at the beginning, try to envision a scenario where you're trying to obtain credentials. One of my favorite ones to use was, again, an IT pretext. So there were times that I would call somebody up on the phone, and the first time that I got it to work, this person just sounded super tired, sounded overworked. It kind of felt a little bit bad for them as well. Where I would call them up and say, this is, I had the right name from the IT department. I noticed that when we pushed out the Windows updates last night, it didn't update. Your computer didn't go all the way through. Of course, that had them all concerned. They wanted to make sure that their computer got all the updates so that way they can retain access, not lose access to anything that they need. We said, let's try it right now. Let me try to, no, it's still not working. So how about this? We can do this for you right now, but the problem is it's going to shut down your computer for probably the next 2 or 3 hours while it does the update. And they're like, no, 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 I can't have that. I'm like, okay, well, I understand. I understand that you don't want that in the middle of the day. You need to get your job done. So you know what I'll do for you? I'll come in late tonight. How about 10 p.m.? I come in and do this update for you. So that way you don't have to lose access to your computer. You don't need anything like that. Like, yeah, can you do that? I'm like, absolutely. But the only thing I'm going to need, just need your password in order to do that. 73% of those, nope, I'm not giving that to you. The first time that I tried that, the first time that it worked for me, somebody was like, yep. They didn't even pause. They were just like, my username is this, my password is this. And I was like, fabulous. I will make sure your computer is updated, fully patched overnight. And that was kind of fun being able to, because I didn't think it was possible to get a username and a password from somebody over the phone either. So when you actually hear it work, it's it's interesting. But the vast majority of time it doesn't. When it does, it's eye-opening, I think, is another way to kind of put that. Smishing, our SMS text message phishing. Very low success rates. When I say very low, it's in all the engagements that I have done with them, which was, I think, done a few of them for like 30,000 people at a time over a few months. So 30,000 times multiple months. Low success rate of 1 to 2%. Most people don't really take action when they get text messages that seem they're going to be fishy. So as far as the success, really depends on what you're going to be looking for. A great example of a breach that happened because of smishing, you can look up Twilio in 2022. Basically, what they did was they sent out, the attackers sent out text messages to people in this Twilio company because they did their research and they found that Twilio was using, I think, Okta as their single sign-on, and told people that their password was expired. They weren't going to be able to get access to Okta, and they gave them a link right in the text message in order to update their password. It worked because, again, with smishing, you don't need a really huge success rate if you're sending it out to everybody in the company. And another interesting thing with this is it's relatively inexpensive. And if you start thinking about how many phones there are out there and how many people that you can actually smish, it's relatively small numbers. So some of the success rates can work pretty well. And when people get that message on their phone from the text that says it is from the company and that they're locked out, sometimes their brain just stops thinking. And they are really concerned that they're going to lose access, and just jump on it right away to make sure that there aren't any kind of problems with that. And since the breach was not an ethical tester, they probably used some of the manipulation threats, anything like that, to make sure that they were able to get access as well. Physical access, kind of mentioned this one a little bit earlier, my impersonation, where the attackers just try to blend in. Usually the goal is to try to steal information, whether that is physically removing it. I've talked to somebody else that one time got access into a data center and they physically removed a server from the facility, brought it out to the car, took a picture, anything like that. Usually by steal information, the way that I document those, just by taking a picture, just to show that I was in the location. Or some of the other things that I've done is brought sticky notes where I just said, like, Compass Cybersecurity was here, and put that in certain places. So when they come the next day, they can see, like, that's a place that somebody walking in off the street should not be able to get access to. Or another thing is being able to create long-term access. We have different tools that we can plug in that's going to create a reverse connection back to servers that we control. So we can just plug in this device, walk out, and now we basically have a terminal access into that company as well. So these are some of the things that we're usually trying to do with these. And for this, the advice that I love to give is to make sure that you have fostered a culture of security for confrontation. Nobody loves confrontation. Maybe some people do, but most people do not like to confront others. And I remember at one company that I worked, we had a policy that when you were inside the office, you had to make sure that your company ID badge was always visible. And we were told that everybody was empowered to request to see the employee ID badge if it wasn't visible. I was one of the people that was responsible for doing the onboarding for the new hires as far as the security policies. So we'd go in on the new hire onboarding day for about 45 minutes as the security team and explain these policies that you are empowered to ask anybody that you do not see their ID badge while they're in the building to show it. And of course, you're also supposed to be showing yours. And I remember there was one of the times that somebody walked out of that onboarding meeting, brand new first day on the job, and they see somebody walking down the hall without an ID badge. Since he was just told that, we support you asking for this, they stopped the person and they asked for, like, I'm sorry, I'm new here, but I was told that I'm supposed to ask, so can I see your ID badge? The person that they asked, huge smile on his face. He's like, yes, absolutely. He pulled out his ID badge, showed it to the new hire, and he was the CEO of the company. And the only reason that we knew about that was because a few minutes later, the CEO of the company sent an email to everybody in the company calling that person out saying, this person did it exactly right. This is exactly what we want in this company. I did not have my ID badge publicly facing, wasn't showing, and he stopped me and he asked for it. We want everybody to be able to do that. So if you get that message from the CEO and the CEO saying that that is exactly what we want, everybody's going to support that, because who else could possibly say, I'm too good to show you my badge? That is going to be the culture of security that you want in the company. And if you're somebody that still doesn't feel comfortable with that, at a minimum, you should be able to then make a phone call to the security department and say, there's somebody walking around without a badge. I saw them over here. Go see them as well. All right. So yeah, for some of this stuff, let's see. I put down some notes here for some story time as well. One of the favorite ones was being able to access a bank as a sports team. So like we said, we always start with our open source intelligence gathering, getting some information. And one of the things that we saw was the client was affiliated with the local professional sports team. And we thought this would be kind of cool to use. They had like this big advertising campaign where the sports team with the bank was affiliated with one of the very well-known players from that sports team, which I thought was great. And I'm like, this is going to be my way in. So really what we did was we were supposed to see if we get access into any of the sensitive areas without going into the vault, without going behind the bank's teller line, anything like that. So I said, I want to see if I can get into the data closet, get into where the servers are. So what we decided that we were going to do is we walked in, we were wearing clothes from that sports team, and we just immediately walked into the manager's office and we said, we're from the sports team and we're going to be doing an update to the advertising campaign where that athlete that you already have the relationship with is going to be filming a commercial in one of your locations. And we're here to see if yours, this one specific branch, is where we want it to be, which of course they just start beaming. They love the idea because it was a local, professional, well-known athlete. They want that person to come into their branch. Like, yes, absolutely. Walk all around, do everything you need to do. Spend 5-10 minutes just looking around, checking everything, measuring, checking lighting, which was absolutely, we had no idea what we were doing with that, but made it look good. And then after 5 or 10 minutes, we said, okay, this looks pretty good. But the other thing I can tell you is when they do the video recording of the commercial with the athlete, they want to get it back to the offices as soon as possible so they can create the advertising. And the way that they do that is they need to put it through your servers. So can we just look at your servers to make sure that they are up to code, that when we plug in, that it's all going to go? Every single one of them was like, yes, absolutely. They opened the door, they showed us, and what we did from there was we made sure we had 2 people on my team working with it. So the other person who was on my team gradually kind of talked to them walked them away while I was alone in the data center taking pictures and showing that I could have had one of those tools to create the long-term access and to plug in from right there. So that's one of those physical access stories that we have as well. So prevention, this is going to be the last thing. I always like to talk about prevention and how we stop people from doing social engineering. And I always say it's my two V's. So if you remember anything from this on how to stop all types of social engineering attacks, it's going to be my two V's: verification, validation. If you start thinking about all the different types of social engineering engagements types that actually exist, if you do verification and validation of the information that the social engineer is giving you, you're probably going to shut them all down. I haven't really come up with a way yet that if somebody properly verifies and validates, that I'm still going to be able to successfully exploit or breach somebody through social engineering. So some of the things that you can think about with these: you get that email, you get that text message, where is it coming from? Is it coming from where it should be? And if you're unsure, go ahead and ask, not by replying to it, but find an out of band, some other way of asking the person. I was at one company and my own manager sent me a message that seemed a little bit odd. And he actually sat in the cube right next to me. So I was like, hey, is this really you sending? He's like, yeah, I know it sounds odd, but that's how I did that validation with it as well. Somebody calls you on the phone, your bank calls you and says there's been some issues with some crazy withdrawals from your bank. You need to deal with this. Is that actually coming from the bank? The best way to do: hang up, call back, not at the number that the person gives you over the phone, because that's something that I'm going to do during my testing. Is I'm going to give you my number to call me back. Don't call that number. Go look up what is the correct phone number, call the bank back, because if there actually is an issue with it, they'll be able to deal with it from there. We mentioned being able to see the ID badge, being able to escort them to security. And the same thing is if you're ever up against somebody that is doing one of these physical social engineering engagements inside your building, and they show you a social engineering permission letter, basically saying, yes, this was a test, I'm supposed to be here. Just to let you know, one of the little tricks that we're going to do is we're going to put fake information on there sometimes as well. So if you call the number that's on the letter that we're giving you, it's just going to go back to my manager, who's going to say, yes, that seems valid. Go ahead and let them in. So make sure, again, you verify and validate who they are and who they are supposed to be working with. So we have all of that. So I see that we're coming up against the end of our time, and I also saw that there are some questions. So if anybody needs to get in touch with me, you can contact me at my Laverty at compasscyberguard.com. On the socials, LinkedIn, Laverty9 is all places that you can find me, and I can pull up the chats here as well and see if there was anything. What are the most effective trainings that I have seen or done? The most effective training that I like to see is to let people come up with the ideas for the attacks themselves. Sometimes some phishing engagements are ones where you sit with everybody and say, okay, let's do some research on who, and let's come up with an idea on how we're going to phish the CEO. It gets people's brain working in that direction. Instead of just defense, it gets them working, thinking about the offense. So once they start thinking about the offense, it helps to defend as well. Also, some of the most effective, wasn't really a training, but a result was that one that I mentioned where I was inside for about an hour and a half, and eventually that one employee caught me. That person is going to be the biggest advocate for the company against these types of attacks. She was already telling other people the stuff that we had done and the way that we had gotten through there and the things that we were saying. So that is going to be some of the best training that is available as well. Let's see what else we have here. Please post any other questions. Cool. All right. So if anybody else has questions, we certainly have time for those. But this has been a whole lot of fun being able to talk about some of these trends and techniques, our TTPs that we use in order to use social engineering to create breaches.
Yeah, this is great stuff, Patrick. Appreciate you taking the time. Since we have a moment here, we'll give folks another minute or two to pop any questions that they have in there. But I'm going to put you on the spot here. Any other stories that you want to share? I think that's pretty fascinating, right? To hear some of the different things that you're able to do. So I'll give you time for another story. How's that?
Awesome. Yeah, there was another story. I think I had it back here somewhere, was the accessing a municipal water facility. So we were tasked with seeing if we could get access into a municipal water facility, which is the facility who is responsible for making sure that clean water goes out to the entire city. And imagine if somebody could do bad stuff to that water before it goes out. We said, this sounds like a whole lot of fun. They asked us if we could get access to the water tanks and pour white powder into it, which we said, absolutely not. I am not carrying white powder into a municipal water facility because one, I don't want to get shot. But two, that's unnecessary. We can prove that we get access, which eventually we did. But another thing that we were able to do in there as well is just through the OSINT, that open source intelligence gathering, we were able to find the facility's internet service provider. So one of the things that we did was we dressed up exactly like the internet service provider, and we just walked in the front door and we said, we heard that you're having some slowness, some outages. And they said, yes, we are. So one of the things that I asked them was like, okay, well, I think it's getting better, so let me check. Do you mind if we do a speed test on your computer? And this one person, yeah, absolutely. You can do a speed test to see if we are getting enough bandwidth to the computer. I went to hand over a little USB and I was like, if you want, I can just do it. She stood up from her computer, said, yep, absolutely. And I just had a little USB device where the only thing that it did was I created an exe on there that would just pop up, you passed the speed test. But you can imagine some of the tools that we have where we could have put a USB into somebody's computer, which then created all access to other things as well. I've got pictures of that. I get a whole different presentation about that entire engagement that went in there as well. Let's see. Lots of value in the point about who did not report versus who clicked. Great. I hope people take the reporting versus clicking away. Any stories related to AI threats, how to prevent and detect? Really, as far as the stories, it's nothing more. I have not actually done an AI attack yet. I haven't really played with any of that so much, largely because I like getting my hands in there and doing it myself. Doing some of the voice changing, video changing, I haven't dug in too much with that. So really all I've seen is some of the news stories of the other ones that have actually worked. Like I said, there was one from 2019 where a company got compromised because the attackers were able to use AI to change face, change voice, and I think it was about $250,000 that they extracted from the company with that one. How to prevent and detect? It's going to be extremely hard if somebody that looks and sounds like your CEO is on your video computer in front of you telling you to do these types of things. But does it make sense if your CEO is asking you to go do these types of things? If the CFO is asking you to go wire money, does that kind of thing make sense? And we also, with these types of attacks, always want to have what we know from years of security experience is our defense in depth. Go back to our validation verification. If they're asking you to send this money somewhere, does that make sense? Let's go verify and validate that that's where it's going to go. And if something goes off in your head, like this, the CFO doesn't usually ask me to do this kind of thing. Hang up, call the CFO at the number in the company directory and say, is this really something that you want me to do? Verify and validate with that. You can also do it to the other end to make sure that the place that they say it is supposed to go is where it is going as well. So it's really going to be that whole verify and validate are ways that we can prevent these attacks as well.